The movement began before anyone called it a crisis. In less than 72 hours, more than 140 American combat aircraft changed position. F-22 Raptors lifted from Alaskan runways and disappeared into long Pacific arcs. F-35 squadrons departed European bases under routine filing codes that looked administrative, not historic. F-15E Strike Eagles repositioned through Jordan. More than 50 aerial refueling tankers formed a transcontinental bridge across the Atlantic. 2 carrier strike groups adjusted course, one tightening its orbit in the eastern Mediterranean, the other sliding into a calculated geometry in the Arabian Sea. In Missouri, B-2 Spirit crews were quietly placed on elevated readiness. No declaration, no ultimatum, no speech from a podium, just motion. The scale alone was enough to unsettle analysts. This was not a symbolic flyover, not a routine rotation. The density of assets, the redundancy of platforms, the layering of support aircraft. It pointed to something far more deliberate. 40-plus tankers do not deploy for theater. They deploy when planners expect sustained operations. 6 airborne command and control aircraft do not reposition for a single surgical strike. They move when coordination across multiple axes must be flawless, because failure costs pilots. The first tension in the region did not come from explosions. It came from radar screens. Israeli early warning stations began tracking tanker corridors stretching west to east like luminous highways in the sky. Saudi air defense systems increased readiness levels without public explanation. Commercial pilots received revised NOTAM advisories altering civilian traffic lanes across parts of the Gulf. Something was assembling, and assembling at scale. The official framing from Washington emphasized deterrence, reinforcing stability, protecting regional partners. But military professionals read posture differently than press statements. Redundancy means planners are accounting for losses. Layered air dominance assets mean contested airspace is expected. Expanded Patriot deployments at Allied bases mean retaliation is anticipated. Put together, the picture did not resemble a clean demonstration. It resembled preparation for friction. The question forming quietly in regional capitals was simple. Why this much force? Iran has not won a conventional air war in modern history. Its air fleet is aging. Its infrastructure is known. Its vulnerabilities are mapped. Yet the United States was assembling a force package usually reserved for sustained campaigns. Because Iran is not Iraq in 2003. It is not Libya. It is not an isolated target waiting for precision. Over decades of sanctions and explicit strategic pressure, Tehran built something different. Not an air force capable of contesting American dominance, but an architecture designed to survive it. Mobile ballistic missile units, layered, domestically sustained air defense networks, dispersed drone production facilities, hardened underground storage sites. None of these can defeat American air power outright, but none can be erased in a single night either. American planners understand this. The massing of aircraft reflects respect, not bravado. Every F-22 forward deployed reduces uncertainty. Every additional tanker extends operational endurance. Every carrier provides options if land bases become vulnerable. This is not the posture of a military expecting an easy victory. It is the posture of a military preparing for complexity. Meanwhile, Tehran watched. Iran did not mirror the mobilization with visible panic. There were no mass scrambles of fighter aircraft, no dramatic missile tests broadcast on state television. Instead, subtle adjustments, increased dispersal of mobile launchers, intermittent radar activations testing frequencies, elevated alert posture among Revolutionary Guard units without full mobilization, measured, deliberate. The Gulf region felt the shift first. Shipping insurers quietly recalculated risk exposure through the Strait of Hormuz. Energy traders began modeling contingency price spikes. European diplomats reopened dormant communication channels. Not because bombs were falling, because they might. The most dangerous phase of any potential conflict is not the opening strike. It is the accumulation of force before it, when hardware moves faster than diplomacy, when tankers form invisible corridors in the sky, when aircraft carriers hold position just outside headlines. By the end of the first week, more American warplanes were positioned within operational reach of the Middle East than at any point in recent years. The jets were fueled, the missiles were loaded, the radar networks were active, and yet nothing had happened. That silence was not reassurance. It was pressure building inside a sealed chamber. The tension in the Middle East was no longer hypothetical. It was airborne. By the second week, the mobilization stopped looking temporary. It began to look structural. Airfields across the region were no longer just hosting visiting squadrons. They were absorbing them. Additional munitions shipments arrived under heavy security. Hardened shelters were cleared. Maintenance crews worked in rotating 24-hour cycles. The infrastructure of a short deployment feels different than the infrastructure of a campaign. This felt like a campaign. Satellite imagery confirmed expanded ammunition and storage at multiple regional bases. Tanker aircraft maintained continuous racetrack patterns stretching from the eastern Mediterranean to the Arabian Sea. Airborne early warning platforms orbited methodically, stitching together a real-time air picture across thousands of square miles. Redundancy was everywhere. If one base were hit, another could assume its mission. If one radar feed went dark, overlapping coverage would fill the gap. If one carrier moved, the other maintained the line. The message was unmistakable. The United States was building operational depth. Tehran understood depth. Iran did not respond with spectacle. It responded with geometry. Within hours of the first large-scale American repositioning, Iranian mobile missile units began dispersal drills under cover of routine exercises. Launchers that typically remained clustered near known garrisons quietly spread across secondary road networks and pre-surveyed concealment sites. This was not a scramble, it was rehearsal. Iran's conventional air force remained largely grounded. Its aging F-14S, F-4s, and MiG-29s held in reserve rather than displayed. Iranian planners were not naive. They knew their fighters could not contest American F-22s and F-35s for long. Airframes do not win wars when the technology gap spans generations. Instead, Iran leaned into the architecture it had invested in for decades: survivability through dispersion, underground storage tunnels carved into mountain ranges, fiber optic communication nodes buried beneath civilian infrastructure, ballistic missile transporters designed to relocate within minutes of detection. The goal was not to defeat American aircraft in the sky. The goal was to ensure that no first strike could eliminate Iran's capacity to respond. That distinction changes everything. American intelligence officers monitored unusual but disciplined shifts in radar behavior along the southern Iranian coastline. Rather than broadcasting at full power continuously, several air defense sites began cycling emissions in short bursts, probing for vulnerabilities without fully exposing themselves. It was a chess move, not a panic reaction. Meanwhile, in the Strait of Hormuz, the tension migrated from air to sea. Iranian naval fast attack craft increased patrol frequency, though without aggressive maneuvers. Mining vessels were not observed deploying ordnance, but maritime analysts noted heightened readiness at facilities capable of rapid deployment. The strait carries roughly 20% of global oil supply. Even a temporary disruption would send shockwaves through every major economy. Oil markets began reacting before any missile was fired. Futures contracts climbed. Shipping insurance premiums ticked upward. Energy-dependent nations quietly reviewed contingency reserves. This is how modern escalation works. It begins in spreadsheets before battlefields. Back in Washington, planners were not asking whether Iran could win a conventional air war. They were asking how quickly the retaliation cascade would begin once strikes commenced. Iran's ballistic missile inventory is not symbolic. It is extensive and mobile. Hundreds of short and medium-range systems capable of targeting American bases in Bahrain, Qatar, Kuwait, and the UAE. Unlike fixed runways or radar installations, road mobile launchers cannot be neatly erased in an opening salvo. They hide, they relocate, they fire and disappear. Even a partially successful barrage would generate casualties. And casualties change politics faster than air superiority statistics. Beyond missiles lies another layer: drones. Iran's loitering munitions are inexpensive and scalable, individually unimpressive, collectively overwhelming. American Patriot interceptors cost millions per shot. Iranian drones cost a fraction. The arithmetic favors saturation. Pentagon planners reinforced regional missile defenses not because they doubted American capability, but because they understood the math of volume. Even advanced systems have magazine limits. The deployment of so many tankers, so many command aircraft, so many strike platforms reflected an awareness that the conflict, if triggered, would not end in a single night. It would stretch. The first 48 hours would likely erase Iran's conventional air fleet from meaningful participation. Runways cratered, aircraft destroyed or grounded, radar networks degraded. But that would not conclude the war. It would transition it. From air dominance to endurance, from destruction to cost imposition, Tehran's strategists have studied American military campaigns carefully. Iraq, Afghanistan, Libya. They understand that the United States can dominate the opening act. Their doctrine does not hinge on winning that act. It hinges on surviving it. Survival buys time. Time activates proxies. Hezbollah in Lebanon, militia networks in Iraq and Syria, Houthi forces in Yemen, each capable of adding new fronts, new targets, new uncertainty. Distributed pressure instead of centralized confrontation, that is the design. By the end of the second week, both sides had completed something significant, not an attack, a recognition. Washington recognized that this would not be a short or tidy campaign. Tehran recognized that the assembled American force was not a bluff. The aircraft were still grounded, the missiles were still in their tubes. But the region no longer felt balanced. It felt calibrated, delicately, dangerously calibrated, between deterrence and ignition. And in that calibration, the smallest miscalculation could turn mobilization into war. By the third week, the buildup had stopped being a headline. It became background reality. Tankers continued their loops. Fighters rotated through forward bases. Carrier decks launched and recovered aircraft in disciplined cycles that looked routine. Because routine is how you normalize readiness. But normalization does not reduce risk. It embeds it. The strategic conversation in Washington shifted from, "Can we strike?" to, "What happens in the 72 hours after we do?" Because the opening phase of any conflict with Iran was not mysterious. It had been modeled repeatedly. Tomahawk salvos would target fixed radar arrays, surface-to-air missile batteries, and known command nodes. F-22s would clear contested airspace. F-35s would feed targeting data to legacy aircraft delivering precision strikes. Electronic warfare platforms would blind communications. Within 48 hours, Iran's conventional air fleet would be largely neutralized. Runways cratered, hangars burning, command networks disrupted. On those narrow metrics, the outcome would favor Washington overwhelmingly. But wars are not won on narrow metrics. They are decided in cascades. The first cascade would be ballistic. Iran's missile forces are not symbolic deterrents. They are operational tools. Hundreds of road mobile launchers dispersed across a terrain the size of Western Europe, some hidden in mountain tunnels, others camouflaged within civilian industrial zones. Even a fraction of that arsenal launched in coordinated waves would strain missile defenses across the Gulf. Patriot batteries can intercept. Thaad systems can engage. But no system has infinite interceptors. Every missile that penetrates becomes a political event. Every impact on a U.S. base or allied infrastructure reshapes domestic opinion. And domestic opinion shapes endurance. The second cascade would be maritime. The Strait of Hormuz narrows to less than 21 miles at its tightest point. Tankers pass through in predictable lanes. Iran has invested heavily in anti-ship missiles, naval mines, and swarm tactics using small, fast boats. Closing the strait completely would be difficult. Disrupting it temporarily would be far easier. Even limited mining operations could halt traffic long enough to send oil above $150 per barrel within days. Japan, South Korea, India, China, each dependent on Gulf energy. An air war would instantly become an economic war. The third cascade would be distributed. Hezbollah possesses tens of thousands of rockets in southern Lebanon. Iraqi militias can strike U.S. installations with rockets and drones. Houthi forces can threaten Red Sea shipping lanes. None of these fronts require centralized command to activate. They require only authorization, and once activated, they create complexity. Israel would face simultaneous northern barrages. Saudi energy facilities, including processing hubs previously struck in 2019, would become high-value targets again. European governments would face energy shocks while balancing alliance obligations. China would confront an immediate energy security dilemma. Russia would watch carefully, weighing how prolonged American involvement in the Middle East alters its own strategic position. This is why the mass of American aircraft matters, not because they guarantee victory, but because they attempt to manage complexity, redundant strike corridors, overlapping electronic warfare coverage, layered missile defense reinforcement. The buildup signals that planners are not anticipating a single night of strikes. They are anticipating friction. Tehran understands friction. Iran's conventional air force is not its primary deterrent. Its aging F-14S, F-4s, and MiG-29s would likely suffer catastrophic losses in direct engagement with F-22s and F-35s. Iranian pilots are skilled, motivated, but machines matter, and the generational gap is unforgiving. Tehran never designed its air force to win that fight. It designed its strategic architecture to survive beyond it. Survival enables retaliation. Retaliation imposes cost. Cost erodes political will. Iran's military doctrine openly acknowledges this calculus. The objective is not battlefield dominance, it is endurance. In Washington, that endurance calculation is the most difficult variable. Initial public support for decisive action is historically high at the outset of conflict. But sustained missile exchanges, rising oil prices, and extended deployments shift that support. History has precedent. Iraq in 1991 ended quickly. Iraq in 2003 did not. Afghanistan did not. Air superiority does not guarantee strategic conclusion. Tehran's strategists have studied those campaigns carefully. They understand American domestic timelines. They understand election cycles. They understand media saturation. Their question is not whether they can defeat American aircraft. It is whether they can outlast American patience. By the end of the third week, intelligence assessments across multiple capitals converged on the same conclusion. The mobilization was real. The deterrent architecture on both sides was real. The first 72 hours of conflict would be devastating. But the war, if triggered, would not be decided in those hours. It would be decided in the months that followed. And that realization began to alter the temperature of decision-making rooms. The aircraft were in place. The missiles were fueled. The tankers maintained their corridors. Yet still, no order had been given. Because the most dangerous moment is not when the first bomb falls. It is when leaders realize that once it does, control becomes theoretical. By the fourth week, the silence itself had become strategic. The aircraft were still there. The tankers still traced long white arcs across satellite imagery. Two carrier strike groups held their geometry, one west of the Gulf, one east, creating a bracket that looked less like deterrence and more like containment. Nothing had fired, and that was precisely the point. Because mobilization at this scale does not only prepare for war, it changes behavior before war begins. Tehran had noticed. Iran did not scramble its air force in theatrical defiance. It did not test a ballistic missile for cameras. It did not close the Strait of Hormuz. Instead, it slowed. Missile dispersal continued, but without launch posture. Drone units increased readiness, but without deployment. Proxy networks shifted into standby, but did not activate. This was not capitulation. It was calculation. Iran's leadership understood the arithmetic. A first strike could be absorbed. A second wave could be survived. But an open-ended air campaign backed by two carrier groups and stealth bombers on rotation would be punishing. And punishment is cumulative. In Washington, analysts began noticing subtle changes. Iranian radar sites that had pulsed intermittently began transmitting even less frequently. Maritime patrols in the strait reduced visible aggression. Cyber probes decreased in intensity. The region had entered a phase neither side publicly acknowledged: calibrated restraint. This is what large-scale mobilization does at its most effective. It forces the adversary to consider not whether you can strike, but whether you will continue striking. The B-2s remained on alert. The F-22s remained forward. The F-35 squadrons maintained operational readiness, with full strike packages loaded in hardened shelters. But the longer the force posture remained static, the more it evolved from imminent attack to sustained leverage. Allies recalibrated too. Saudi Arabia and the UAE increased quiet intelligence cooperation, while publicly calling for de-escalation. Israel reinforced northern defenses, but withheld preemptive moves against Hezbollah. European governments issued carefully worded statements, urging dialogue while keeping airspace access open to U.S. aircraft. China signaled through diplomatic channels that energy stability was paramount. Russia advised Tehran privately that escalation would not yield support beyond rhetoric. The buildup had become a pressure chamber, and inside that chamber, every decision weighed heavier. By this stage, American planners were confronting the most difficult question of all. If we strike, do we achieve a decisive shift? Or do we enter a prolonged cycle that strengthens the very deterrent architecture we are trying to degrade? Because history had shown something uncomfortable. Destroying infrastructure is straightforward. Managing aftermath is not. Iran's nuclear facilities, missile storage depots, and air defense nodes could be damaged or destroyed. But ballistic launchers hidden in valleys, drone workshops embedded in civilian industrial zones, and proxy networks dispersed across borders cannot be erased overnight. They regenerate, they adapt. And every day of sustained conflict multiplies economic consequences. Oil markets had already reacted to mere mobilization. A real strike would amplify volatility exponentially. The Strait of Hormuz remained open, but every shipping company knew how quickly that could change. By the end of the month, something unexpected had happened. The tension had plateaued, not disappeared, stabilized. The aircraft remained, the missiles remained, the readiness remained. But the immediate threshold had not been crossed. In Tehran, leadership concluded that surviving the buildup without firing first was itself a strategic win. In Washington, policymakers recognized that assembling overwhelming force had achieved leverage without immediate escalation. Neither side claimed victory, neither side backed down. Instead, the region entered a colder phase of competition, one defined not by detonations, but by endurance. The jets could still launch, the carriers could still fire, the missiles could still rise. But the clock that once seemed to be counting down to impact had shifted into something more complex. A test of discipline, a test of nerves, a test of whether deterrence built on mass and visibility could hold without crossing into irreversible action. More than 140 American warplanes had mobilized in days. 2 carrier groups had taken position. The Middle East had braced for shock, and what followed was not explosion, but tension sustained at the edge of ignition. Because sometimes the most dangerous weapon in the sky is not the one that fires. It is the one that remains armed, visible, and waiting.